Lieutenant Commander Jessica Harlow had been undercover for 3 months, and in all that time, she'd maintained her cover as a humanitarian aid worker with perfect discipline. She'd endured inspections, interrogations, and the constant scrutiny of suspicious warlords without breaking character once. Her mission was intelligence gathering: observe, document, report, nothing more. The rules of engagement were crystal clear: maintain cover at all costs, avoid confrontation, exfiltrate if compromised. But rules changed when you were zip-tied to a chair in a concrete room, surrounded by 5 heavily armed militants, and the man who called himself Commander Rashid decided to make an example of the weak Western woman by backhanding her across the face so hard her lip split and blood ran down her chin. That's when Jessica made a calculation that would haunt Rashid for the approximately 7 minutes he had left to live. Some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. And when you hit a Navy SEAL, even one with her hands bound behind her back, even one outnumbered 5-1, even one who's supposed to be maintaining a cover identity, you've just made the last mistake of your life. Before we show you what happened in that room, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and hit subscribe, because what came next was 7 minutes of violence so precise, so calculated, and so absolutely devastating that it would become a classified case study in what happens when training, capability, and pure controlled rage converge in a person who knows exactly how dangerous they are. The concrete room was approximately 12 feet by 15 feet, Jessica noted automatically, despite the ringing in her ears from the blow. 1 door, steel reinforced, currently closed. 2 windows, both high and barred. Temperature approximately 95 degrees. Humidity high. The smell of gun oil, sweat, and something else. Fear, maybe, though not her own. She was average height, athletic build carefully hidden under loose clothing that made her look softer than she was. Brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, now disheveled. Hazel eyes that tracked every movement in the room with a precision that would have alarmed her captors if they'd been paying attention. But they weren't paying attention. They were celebrating. Commander Rashid, not his real rank, probably not even his real name, stood in front of her, rubbing his knuckles where they'd connected with her face. 40-something, barrel-chested, the kind of man who'd built his authority on intimidation and violence. 4 of his men stood behind him, AK-47s, held with the casual competence of people who'd used them in anger. "The American woman is not so strong now," Rashid said in Arabic, then switched to English for her benefit. "Where is your arrogance? Where is your Western superiority?" Jessica said nothing. Blood dripped from her split lip onto her dusty aid worker shirt. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back, the plastic cutting into her wrists. The chair she sat in was bolted to the floor. They'd learned that lesson from previous interrogations, apparently. What they hadn't learned was that the woman sitting in front of them had spent 8 years in naval special warfare, had completed BUD-as in a class where 73% had rung the bell, had conducted operations in 11 different countries, and had a confirmed kill count that would make most infantry soldiers uncomfortable. They also hadn't learned that zip ties, while effective against civilians, were practically meaningless to someone who'd been trained to escape from them in under 30 seconds. But Jessica wasn't in a hurry. Not yet. "I am humanitarian worker," she said in deliberately broken English, maintaining her cover even now. "I give medicine to children. Why you do this?" Rashid laughed and struck her again, this time a closed fist to the side of her head. Stars exploded across her vision. She let her head roll with the impact, proper technique to minimize damage, and when it came back up, there was blood running from her nose now too. "You are spy," Rashid said. "American spy. You think we are stupid? You think we don't see you asking questions, taking pictures?" 2 of the men behind him laughed. One of them, younger, maybe mid-20s, with a scar across his left cheek, stepped closer, his AK-47 pointed casually at her chest. "Maybe we have some fun with the spy before we kill her," Scarface suggested in Arabic, apparently thinking she didn't understand. Jessica understood perfectly. She spoke Arabic, Pashto, Dari, and passable Urdu. It was one of the reasons she'd been selected for this mission. It was also one of the many reasons these men were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. Rashid considered the suggestion, then shook his head. Later. First, we get information. Then we send video to Americans showing what happens to their spies. He grabbed Jessica's hair, yanking her head back. You will tell us everything. Who sent you? What is your mission? Who are your contacts? Jessica met his eyes and saw what she needed to see. Overconfidence. He thought he'd won, thought the tied hands and the guns and the numerical advantage made this a foregone conclusion. He was wrong. I tell you truth, Jessica said, maintaining her broken English. I am aid worker. Please, you make mistake. Rashid struck her a third time. This one caught her cheekbone and would definitely leave a bruise. No more lies, he roared. You will talk or you will suffer before you die. Jessica took a slow breath through her nose, tasting blood, and made her decision. She'd maintained cover for 3 months. She'd gathered the intelligence she'd been sent to collect. She'd followed orders, stayed disciplined, been the perfect covert operative. But there were limits. Lines that, once crossed, changed everything. Rashid had just crossed one. Okay, Jessica said, and this time her English was perfect. Accent gone, voice steady and cold as winter. I'll talk. The change in her voice made Rashid pause. Something in his eyes shifted, the first flicker of doubt. My name is Lieutenant Commander Jessica Harlow, United States Navy, she said clearly. Serial number 5847392, and you just made the last mistake of your life. The room went very quiet. Then Rashid laughed, though it sounded forced. Big words from woman tied to chair. You think? Jessica moved. The zip tie breaking technique she'd been taught at SERE school required specific body positioning and explosive force. You brought your bound hands up over your head while simultaneously bringing your elbows down hard and fast. The plastic would snap at the locking mechanism if you did it right. She did it right. The zip tie broke with a sharp crack. Her hands came around in the same motion, and before anyone could process what had just happened, she'd grabbed the chair she'd been sitting in, which wasn't actually bolted down, she'd been testing that, and swung it in a horizontal arc that caught Rashid in the side of the head with the force of someone who could bench press her own body weight 20 times. Rashid went down hard, blood spraying from a split scalp. The 4 guards were already bringing their weapons up, but Jessica was already moving through their reaction time. She'd spent years training muscle memory to function faster than conscious thought, and those years paid dividends now. She threw the chair at Scarface. He brought his AK-47 up to block, which meant he wasn't shooting, which gave her the half-second she needed to close the distance. Close quarters combat against multiple armed opponents was about 3 things: speed, violence of action, and using their weapons against them. The moment you stopped moving, you died. The moment you hesitated, you died. The only way to survive was to be more aggressive than they could process. Jessica became a blur of controlled violence. She reached Scarface as he was trying to get his rifle back on target. Her hand shot out, grabbed the barrel, and pushed it aside just as he fired. The burst of automatic fire went wide, hitting the wall instead of her. In the same motion, she drove her knee into his groin, stepped behind him as he doubled over, and used his body as a shield while yanking the AK-47 from his hands. Guard 2 was firing now. The rounds hit Scarface in the back. Jessica felt the impact through the body she was holding, used it to pivot, and brought the captured AK-47 up in a smooth arc that caught Guard 2 across the face with the stock. He went down. Jessica dropped Scarface's body and transitioned to the rifle properly, bringing it to her shoulder just as Guard 3 got his weapon lined up. They fired simultaneously. His burst went high, panic shooting, which meant he aimed where she had been, not where she was. Jessica's burst was 3 rounds, center mass, textbook perfect. Guard 3 dropped like someone had cut his strings, 2 down, 3 still in play. Guard 4 was smarter. He'd stepped back to get distance, was bringing his weapon up in a proper stance. Jessica ducked behind an overturned table. When had that fallen? Just as he opened fire. Rounds punched through wood, but by then she was rolling right, coming up in a crouch and putting 2 rounds into his exposed flank. 3 down, Two left. Rashid was getting to his feet, blood streaming down his face, reaching for the pistol on his hip. Guard 5, the oldest of the group, maybe 50, with the steady hands of someone who'd been in a lot of fights, had moved to flank her position. Jessica's combat computer was running full speed now, processing angles and threats and probabilities faster than conscious thought. Rashid was closer, but moving slow, concussed from the chair. Guard 5 was the immediate threat. She fired at Guard 5, but her rifle clicked empty. The magazine she'd taken from Scarface had been nearly spent. No time to reload. She threw the rifle at Guard 5, not to hurt him, but to make him flinch, to buy her the second she needed, and rushed Rashid. He got his pistol clear of the holster. She was already inside his firing arc, her left hand slamming into his wrist, directing the pistol away while her right hand drove a palm strike into his already damaged nose. Bone crunched. Rashid screamed. Jessica grabbed the pistol, a Makarov she noted distantly, and twisted it out of his grip using a technique that definitely broke at least 2 of his fingers. She spun, bringing the Makarov up just as Guard 5 opened fire. The world went into slow motion the way it always did in gunfights. She saw the muzzle flash, felt the supersonic crack as rounds passed close enough to her head that they disturbed her hair. She squeezed the Makarov's trigger twice, double-tap center mass, and Guard 5 folded, 4 down, 1 left. Rashid was on his knees, holding his broken nose, blood pouring between his fingers. His eyes were wide with shock and fear, and the dawning realization that he'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. Jessica walked toward him, the Makarov held in a proper 2-handed grip, pointed at his center mass. "Please," Rashid gasped in English. "Please, You hit me," Jessica said, her voice perfectly calm despite the adrenaline still flooding her system. "3 times. You tied my hands. You surrounded me with armed men. You thought that made you powerful." She stopped 2 feet from him, close enough that she couldn't miss, far enough that he couldn't reach her even if he tried. "Let me explain something to you," she continued. "I am a Navy SEAL. Do you know what that means? It means I spent 6 months in training where they tried to break me and failed. It means I've conducted operations in places you've never heard of against people who made you look like an amateur. It means I've been trained to do one thing better than almost anyone else on this planet." She paused, letting him see his death in her eyes. "It means I'm very, very good at killing people." "Please," Rashid whispered again. "I have family." "So did the aid worker you killed last month," Jessica said. "The real one, the one whose identity I've been using. The one you murdered because she was actually trying to help people." Rashid's eyes widened. He hadn't known she knew about that. "I know everything," Jessica said. "That's why I'm here. That's what I've been gathering for 3 months. Names, locations, supply routes, contacts, everything." She raised the pistol slightly, lined up the shot. "Wait," Rashid said desperately. "I can give you information, more than you have. I already have everything I need," Jessica interrupted. "And honestly, you hit me. 3 times, while my hands were tied." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Nobody does that to a SEAL and walks away." The Makarov fired once. Rashid collapsed backward, a neat hole in his forehead. Jessica stood there for a moment, breathing steadily, running through her post-combat checklist. Check for additional threats? None. Check for wounds. Miraculously, none that mattered. Check ammunition. 2 rounds left in the Makarov. The entire fight had lasted approximately 3 minutes and 40 seconds from the moment she'd broken the zip tie to the moment Rashid had stopped breathing. 5 armed men, fully equipped, who thought they had every advantage. 1 SEAL, with her hands literally tied behind her back at the start. It hadn't been close. Jessica searched the bodies quickly and professionally, taking additional ammunition, a better weapon. One of the guards had a well-maintained AK-47 with a full magazine, and, crucially, a cell phone from Rashid's pocket. She tried the steel door, locked from the outside as expected, but the lock was standard commercial grade, which meant it would yield to someone who knew what they were doing. And Jessica definitely knew what she were doing. She used a technique involving a thin piece of metal from one of the guards' equipment and about 90 seconds of patient manipulation. The lock clicked open. The hallway beyond was empty. She moved through it like a ghost, weapon up, checking corners, using proper clearing techniques. Somewhere in this building were probably more guards, more militants, more problems to solve. But that was fine. Solving problems was what she did. She found a stairwell, ascended to the second floor, and located what she'd been looking for, an office, probably Rashid's, with a radio and a satellite phone. She used the satellite phone to dial a number she'd memorized years ago. It rang twice. "Thunder," a voice said. "Lightning," Jessica replied, giving the authentication code. "This is Nightingale. I need immediate extraction from compromised position. 5 enemy killed in action. My cover is blown, but intelligence gathering is complete." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Nightingale, we have your location. Extraction team is 30 minutes out. Can you hold?" Jessica looked around the office, mentally calculating fields of fire and defensive positions. "Affirmative," she said, "but tell them to hurry. This place is going to get crowded soon." She was right. 15 minutes later, she heard shouts from below. Someone had found the bodies in the interrogation room. Alarm was spreading through the compound. Jessica had used those 15 minutes well. She'd barricaded the office door, positioned furniture to create cover, and taken inventory of available ammunition. She had approximately 200 rounds for the AK-47 and a defensive position that would be difficult to assault directly. The first attack came 10 minutes after that. 6 militants tried to rush the office door. Jessica let them get close, then fired controlled bursts through the door at waist height. The assault broke apart in screaming and return fire that didn't come close to her position. The second attack was smarter. They tried to flank through adjacent rooms. Jessica heard them moving, tracked them by sound, and fired through the walls. Concrete couldn't stop AK-47 rounds at close range. Neither could flesh. The third attack never came, because that's when she heard the beautiful sound of helicopter rotors. "Nightingale, this is Reaper 6, a voice crackled over the satellite phone. "We are inbound to your position. Pop smoke and prepare for emergency extraction." Jessica grabbed a smoke grenade she'd taken from one of the guards, threw it out the window, and watched orange smoke billow into the desert air. 30 seconds later, 2 MH-60 Blackhawks roared over the compound, door gunners laying down suppressive fire that sent militants scrambling for cover. One bird landed in the compound courtyard, while the other circled, providing overwatch. Jessica didn't wait for an invitation. She went out the window. Second floor wasn't too high for someone with her training. Hit the ground rolling, came up running, and sprinted toward the helicopter while rounds kicked up dust around her feet. She made it to the bird, was hauled aboard by 2 operators in full tactical gear, and the Blackhawk was lifting off before she'd even sat down. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," one of the operators said with a grin. "Heard you had a rough day." Jessica touched her split lip, her swelling cheekbone, and smiled despite the pain. "Nothing I couldn't handle," she said. The debrief took place 3 days later in a secure facility that officially didn't exist. Jessica sat across a table from Commander Patricia Walsh, her commanding officer, and a 2-star admiral whose name she wasn't cleared to know. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," the admiral said, reviewing the report in front of him. "You were compromised, captured, physically assaulted, and tied to a chair, surrounded by 5 armed hostiles." "Yes, sir," Jessica replied. "And your response was to break free, kill all 5 hostiles, secure the intelligence you'd been gathering, and request extraction while holding off additional enemy forces." "Yes, sir." The admiral was quiet for a moment. Then, "Lieutenant Commander Harlow, I've been in the Navy for 33 years. I've read thousands of after-action reports, and this is, without question, one of the most impressive displays of combat effectiveness I've ever seen." "Thank you, sir." "It's also," he continued, "a massive violation of your operational parameters. You were supposed to maintain cover. You were supposed to avoid confrontation." Jessica met his gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, my operational parameters changed when hostile forces used physical violence against me while I was restrained. At that point, maintaining cover became secondary to survival." "You could have continued playing the aid worker," Walsh interjected. "You might have been able to maintain your cover even after the assault." "No, ma'am," Jessica said firmly. "Once they decided to use torture, because that's what it was, There were only two outcomes. Either I broke and gave them real information, which would have compromised active operations and endangered other personnel, or I maintained silence until they killed me. Neither was acceptable. So you decided to eliminate the threat, the Admiral said. I neutralized immediate hostile forces and secured mission-critical intelligence, sir. Everything I did was in service of mission success. The Admiral and Walsh exchanged a look. Then Walsh said, the intelligence you gathered has already led to 3 successful operations and the disruption of a major arms trafficking network. What you accomplished in those 3 months, what you remembered and transmitted before going dark, has saved lives. That was the mission, ma'am. And the 5 hostiles you killed? The Admiral asked. Any regrets about that? Jessica thought about Rashid's face when he'd hit her, thought about the aid worker who'd been murdered and whose identity Jessica had assumed, thought about all the other people who'd suffered at the hands of those men. No, sir, she said clearly. No regrets whatsoever. The Admiral smiled slightly. Good answer. He closed the file in front of him. Lieutenant Commander Harlow, you're being recommended for commendation. We can't make it public, obviously, but it will be in your permanent record. You're also being taken off rotation for the next month. Medical and psych eval, standard procedure after combat action. Sir, I'm fine. I don't need... That's an order, not a suggestion, Walsh interrupted. You just killed 5 people in close quarters combat after being physically assaulted and restrained. That kind of stress takes a toll even on someone with your training. You'll take the time, you'll talk to the counselors, and you'll clear medical before returning to active duty. Jessica wanted to argue but knew it wouldn't help. Yes, ma'am. Dismissed, the Admiral said. Jessica stood, saluted, and walked toward the door. She was almost out when the Admiral spoke again. Commander Harlow? She turned. Sir? Those men who captured you. Who hit you. You made them regret it. Jessica thought about the 3 minutes and 40 seconds in that concrete room, about the look in Rashid's eyes when he'd realized what she was. Yes, sir, she said. I definitely made them regret it. The Admiral nodded, satisfied. Good. Because there's something I want you to understand. What you did in that room, breaking free, neutralizing 5 armed hostiles, surviving against impossible odds, that's going to be studied, analyzed, broken down into tactical lessons for future operators. He paused, making sure she was listening. But the real lesson isn't about tactics or techniques. It's about what happens when someone makes the mistake of underestimating a SEAL, when they think restraints and numbers give them control, when they forget that the most dangerous weapon in any room isn't the gun or the knife. It's the trained operator who knows how to use everything as a weapon. Jessica stood at attention, understanding the weight of what he was saying. You're going to become a legend, the Admiral continued. The story of what you did will spread through the teams, through the larger special operations community. And every time someone hears it, they'll remember. Never assume someone is helpless just because their hands are tied. Never think violence gives you power over a trained warrior. And never, ever make the mistake of hitting a Navy SEAL and expecting to walk away. Sir, I was just doing my job. No, the Admiral interrupted. You were doing what SEALs do. You were being the person that millions of dollars of training and years of experience created. You were proof that all that selection, all that suffering in BUD-S, all those hours of practice, it works. When it matters most, it works. He stood, extending his hand. Jessica shook it. I've commanded a lot of operators over the years, he said quietly. Some were stronger, some were faster, some had better marksmanship scores. But very few had what you demonstrated in that room, the ability to go from 0 to lethal in the span of a heartbeat, to assess, decide, and execute with perfect precision under the worst possible circumstances. That's what makes you exceptional. Thank you, sir, Jessica said, meaning it. One more thing, the Admiral added. The aid worker whose identity you assumed. The one Rashid killed. Her family knows what you did. They know you avenged her death and stopped the people who murdered her from hurting anyone else. They wanted me to tell you, thank you. Jessica felt something tighten in her chest. She'd been operating under that woman's name for 3 months, had read her journals, learned her mannerisms, effectively become her. The knowledge that her family knew what had happened brought an unexpected weight. "I wish I could have saved her," Jessica said quietly. "You couldn't," Walsh said gently. "She was dead before you ever got there. But you made sure her death meant something. You used her identity to gather intelligence that saved lives, and you made damn sure the people who killed her paid for it." The Admiral nodded. "Dismissed, Commander. Take your month. He'll talk to the counselors, and when you're ready, we'll have another mission waiting for you." Jessica saluted again and left the room. The story of what happened in that compound spread through the naval special warfare community with the speed that really good stories do. The details were classified, but the basic facts became legend. A SEAL operator, compromised and captured, with her hands tied and surrounded by armed hostiles who'd turned the situation around so completely that she'd walked out alive while her captors didn't. Lieutenant Commander Jessica Harlow became a case study at multiple training schools. Not because of what she'd done, the tactics were all standard, techniques that any properly trained operator could execute, but because of when she'd done it, the moment she'd chosen to drop cover and go operational, the split-second decision that had transformed her from prey to predator. Some instructors argued she'd made the right call. Others said she should have maintained cover longer, that there might have been another way. Jessica didn't care about the debate. She knew the truth. There are lines that, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. And when someone hits you, when they use violence against you while you're restrained and helpless, they've made a choice about what kind of encounter this is going to be. Rashid and his men had chosen violence. Jessica had simply been better at it than they were. She returned to active duty after her mandatory month off, passed all her evaluations, and went back to doing the job she'd trained for. More missions, more targets, more problems that needed the particular skill set that made SEALs different from everyone else. But she never forgot the lesson from that concrete room. Training matters. Preparation matters. Physical capability matters. But most important is the willingness to do what needs to be done when the moment comes. Those 5 men had thought tying her hands made her helpless. They'd thought the guns and the numbers in the locked room gave them control. They'd been wrong, because Jessica Harlow was a Navy SEAL. And being a SEAL meant that even with your hands tied behind your back, even outnumbered 5 to 1, even in the worst possible tactical situation, you were still the most dangerous person in the room. The militants had learned that lesson. It had been the last thing they ever learned. Years later, when young operators would ask Jessica about that day, about how she'd done it, about what it felt like, she'd give them the same answer every time. They made a mistake. They thought violence would make me weak. But violence is what I was trained for. It's what I'm good at. And when they hit me, they gave me permission to show them exactly how good I am. Then she'd smile that cold smile that made even other SEALs uncomfortable. Turns out I'm very, very good. And that was all anyone needed to know about what happened when you tied up a Navy SEAL and hit her in the face. You learned, in the very last moments of your life, that some people can't be broken, can't be intimidated, can't be defeated by simple things like restraints or numbers or weapons. Some people are dangerous not because of what they're carrying, but because of what they are. Jessica Harlow was one of those people, and Rashid and his men had discovered that truth the hard way. The training cadre at BUD/S would sometimes tell her story to students who were struggling through Hell Week, when the cold and the exhaustion and the constant physical punishment made them want to quit. Instructors would remind them why they were there. There's going to come a day, the instructors would say, when you're in a situation that seems impossible, when you're outnumbered, outgunned, maybe even restrained, when every logical calculation says you can't win. And that's when all this suffering, all these cold nights, all this pain, all this exhaustion, that's when it pays off. Because we're not teaching you to be comfortable. We're teaching you to be capable when nothing else matters except getting the job done. Then they'd tell the story of Lieutenant Commander Harlow, of the aid worker who turned out to be a SEAL, of the woman who'd been tied to a chair and beaten and who'd responded by eliminating every threat in the room with such efficiency that it became a textbook example of what proper training could accomplish. That's what we're building here, the instructors would conclude. People who can do that. People who are more dangerous than any situation they'll ever face. People who can't be broken, can't be stopped, and can't be beaten because they refuse to accept defeat even when defeat seems inevitable. Some students would hear that story and find the strength to keep going. Others would ring the bell anyway. That was fine. Not everyone was meant to be a SEAL. Not everyone could handle the reality that the training wasn't just about physical capability, it was about forging a mindset that refused to acknowledge limitations. Jessica Harlow embodied that mindset. And somewhere in a desert compound that had been abandoned after her extraction, local people would tell stories about the room where 5 men with guns had captured an American woman, and how she'd killed them all with her bare hands after breaking free from restraints. The details got more dramatic with each telling, as stories do. Some versions had her fighting 20 men. Others said she'd been tortured for days before breaking free. A few claimed she'd disappeared like a ghost, that no helicopter had come, that she'd simply walked out of the compound, leaving only bodies behind. But the core truth remained. A woman had been captured, restrained, and beaten, and the men who did it had paid with their lives. That truth, the simple, undeniable fact that violence against her had consequences, was the real lesson. Not for future SEALs, who already understood that principle, but for anyone who might think that restraints or numbers or weapons made them powerful. They didn't. Training made you powerful. Skill made you powerful. The willingness to do whatever was necessary made you powerful. Jessica Harlow had all 3, and 5 men who'd made the mistake of underestimating her had learned that lesson in the final moments of their lives, when the woman they'd tied up and beaten showed them what a Navy SEAL looked like when the gloves came off and all the rules were suspended. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't merciful. It was just effective. And that was really all that mattered. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories every day.